They told me I was trespassing on my own land. That's how it started. No warning, no polite conversation, just a calm, almost rehearsed voice on the phone saying, "You're over the line, sir." And I remember standing there, one hand still on the fence post I'd replaced that morning, thinking, either I've lost my mind or somebody else has. Now, I've been on that land most of my life. Not all of it mine at first. My dad worked it, his dad before him. But eventually it became mine, piece by piece, acre by acre, until I had just under 130 acres of pasture out in eastern Montana. Good grazing land. Not fancy, not the kind you see in magazines, but steady, dependable. The kind of land that doesn't make you rich overnight, but keeps you fed, keeps you grounded. I always figured I'd grow old there, maybe sit on that same porch my dad built, and watch the sun drop behind the hills like I'd done 1,000 times. The boundary line was never something I worried about. There was an old barbed wire fence running along the east side, probably put up sometime in the late 60s. It leaned a little in spots, had that gray, weathered look like it had stories of its own, but it held. And for decades, that fence was the line. Nobody questioned it. Not my dad, not the folks who used to own the neighboring land, not even the county as far as I knew. But here's the thing. My deed, the actual paperwork filed with the county, said the boundary didn't stop at that fence. It ran about 50 feet past it. Not a huge difference to most people, just a strip of scrubby land, weeds, a few stubborn bushes, nothing you'd build a house on. But it was mine. On paper, at least. And for 20 years, I never gave that detail much thought. Life's busy when you're running cattle, fixing fences, dealing with weather that can turn on you in an afternoon. You don't go measuring every inch of your property just to feel secure. You trust what's been there, what's been accepted. That fence was enough. Until the new neighbors showed up. Their names were Ethan and Claire Whitaker. They came in from out of state, somewhere coastal, Oregon, I think. Bought the ranch next door at full asking price, which around here raised a few eyebrows. Folks don't usually pay full price unless they don't know the land, or they don't care. They talked a lot about sustainability, regenerative farming, solar panels, water conservation. All good ideas, sure, just not how things had been done out here for generations. First time I met Ethan, I was out checking that east fence line. Had a couple posts that needed reinforcing. He walked over, clean boots, brand new hat that hadn't seen a season yet, and stuck out his hand like we were closing a deal. "Hey there, neighbor," he said, smiling like he'd practiced it. "Ethan Whitaker." I shook his hand. Firm grip, I'll give him that. Name's Cole Bennett. We talked a bit. Nothing serious. He mentioned plans for the land, talked about rotating crops, maybe bringing in some specialty livestock. I nodded along. Around here, you let people figure things out on their own. No sense telling a man how to run his place unless he asks. Before he left, I pointed toward the fence. "That's the boundary we've always used. Straight shot all the way down." He glanced at it, gave a quick nod. "Good to know. I appreciate clear lines." That was it. Or at least, that's what I thought. 5 weeks later, everything changed. I was driving my tractor along that same stretch. Early morning, sun just coming up, when I saw them, bright orange stakes, lined up in a row like they'd been planted overnight. Dozens of them, maybe more. They ran parallel to the old fence, but they weren't on the fence line. They were inside my land. At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of mistake. Survey crew got their bearings wrong, maybe. Happens sometimes. But when I climbed down and walked over, I saw the tags. Little metal plates wired to each stake, stamped clean and official looking. Property line. Do not cross. I stood there for a long second, just staring at those words, feeling something tighten in my chest. Not panic exactly. More like disbelief turning into something sharper. I pulled out my phone and called Ethan. He picked up on the second ring, like he'd been expecting it. "What are those stakes doing on my property?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. There was a pause, not long, just enough to feel deliberate. "That's not your land anymore," he said, casual as ordering coffee. "We had it surveyed." I looked back at the stakes, then at the fence, then back again, like somehow the ground might rearrange itself if I gave it enough time. "My deed says otherwise." "Your deed's outdated," he replied. "Surveyor we hired is certified. You might want to check your records. Maybe something got misread over the years." Something in the way he said it, polite, almost sympathetic, but underneath it there was this edge, like he'd already decided how the story ended. I felt my jaw tighten. That land's been in my family for 3 generations. Then maybe it's time to update what you think you own, he said. And just like that, the line had been drawn. Not on the ground. That came later, but between us. I hung up, stood there a while longer, wind brushing through that strip of scrub land that suddenly felt a whole lot more important than it ever had before. Funny how something you barely notice can become everything the moment someone else tries to take it. That afternoon, I drove into town and sat down across from a woman named Diane Mercer. She'd been handling land disputes out here longer than I'd been running cattle. Sharp mind, sharper tongue, the kind of lawyer who didn't waste words unless they mattered. I slid my deed across her desk. Tell me I'm not crazy. She read it slow, careful, then leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing just a touch. If this document's clean, she said, tapping the page, then that land is yours. Doesn't matter what fence is standing or what your neighbor claims. Paper like this, it carries weight. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. So what do? She smiled, just a little. You get your own survey, and you make sure it's done right. And that's when things stopped being a misunderstanding and started becoming a fight. So I did exactly what Diane told me. I got my own survey, and not just anyone with a GPS and a pickup truck. I called in a man named Russell Rusty Hale, been measuring land in Montana since before I learned how to drive. The kind of guy who doesn't say much, but when he does you listen, because he's probably right. Rusty showed up in a dust-covered truck with equipment that looked older than both of us combined, stepped out, squinted at the horizon like he was reacquainting himself with an old friend, and said, "All right, let's see what the land remembers." That's the thing about people like Rusty. They don't just measure land, they read it. He spent 2 full days out there, walking lines, checking old markers buried under decades of dirt, cross-referencing county records, muttering to himself now and then like he was piecing together a puzzle nobody else could see. I stayed out of his way for the most part, just watched from a distance, but every now and then he'd call me over, point at something invisible to me, and say, "This here. This matters," and I'd nod like I understood, even though I didn't, not yet. On the second evening, just as the light started fading, he came up to the porch, pulled a folded map out of his bag, and laid it flat on my table. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just tapped a line with his finger. "Your fence," he said, "has been in the wrong place for a long time, but not the way your neighbor thinks." I leaned in, meaning, he slid his finger farther east. "Your actual boundary sits about 55 feet past that fence." I blinked. 55. He nodded. "Which means those stakes your neighbor put in, they're not just wrong, they're sitting well inside your land. And here's the kicker," he tapped again. "Even where he thinks his line is, he's still 5 feet short of what he's claiming." I let that sink in, slow and heavy. So he's wrong twice. Rusty gave a small shrug. That's one way to put it. Now, I wish I could tell you I felt relief in that moment, like everything snapped back into place and the world made sense again, but it wasn't that simple. What I felt was something sharper, because now I knew this wasn't a mistake. You don't get it that wrong by accident, not with a certified survey like he claimed. This wasn't confusion, this was intention. Diane saw it the same way. She didn't waste time drafting a letter, attached Rusty's survey. Clear as day, polite but firm, giving Ethan 15 days to remove every stake and acknowledge the correct boundary. "We keep it clean," she told me. "Give him a chance to do the right thing before we make it official." I didn't argue. Part of me still hoped this could end without turning into something bigger, something uglier. But Ethan didn't respond the way a reasonable neighbor would. He didn't call, didn't come by, didn't even pretend to consider it. Instead, about a week later, Diane gets a letter back, thick envelope, heavy paper, stamped with the name of a law firm out of Billings, expensive, polished, the kind of firm people hire when they're not planning to back down. Their position was simple, their survey was valid, ours was flawed, and if we wanted to settle it, we should agree to a third, independent survey. I remember Diane reading it out loud, then setting it down and giving me a look that said more than the words did. "They're trying to muddy the water," she said. "More surveys mean more delay, more confusion, and sometimes that's all someone needs to shift the advantage." I crossed my arms, thinking it through. "But we already have 2 surveys." "Exactly," she said, "and both point in your favor." I nodded slow. "Then we don't give them another shot." Diane smiled, just a little sharper this time. That's what I was hoping you'd say. That's when she filed the quiet title action, a legal way of saying, let's have a judge settle this once and for all. And from that moment on, things stopped being neighborly altogether. See, you'd think once lawyers get involved, people get cautious, maybe even pull back a little. Ethan did the opposite. He doubled down. It started small. A few more stakes, closer together this time, like he was reinforcing his version of reality. Then came the posts, fresh wood, straight, clean cuts, driven into the ground along his claimed line. I watched it happen from my side, leaning against the fence that wasn't really the fence anymore, feeling that same tightness in my chest come back, stronger this time. I walked over one afternoon while he was working, hands on my hips, trying to keep things from boiling over. You've seen the survey, I said. You know where the line actually is. He didn't stop what he was doing, just kept hammering, steady rhythm, like my words were background noise. I've seen your version of it, he replied. Doesn't make it correct. I stepped closer. A judge is going to decide that soon enough. That made him pause, just for a second. He looked up at me, sweat on his forehead, eyes calm in a way that felt calculated. By the time that happens, he said, this land will already be in use. I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? He leaned on the post, almost casual. Possession matters, Cole. Always has. You build, you maintain, you show control, it counts. I let out a short breath, more disbelief than anything. You're building on land you don't own. He tilted his head, slight smile creeping in. That's your opinion. And then he went right back to hammering. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about land to him. This was about proving something. Maybe to me, maybe to himself, maybe to whoever he left behind back in Oregon. I started noticing more after that. Trucks coming in, equipment unloaded, irrigation lines laid out like veins across that strip of land. One morning, I saw the frame of a small shed going up, right there, square in the middle of what Rusty had marked as mine. It wasn't a mistake anymore, it was a statement. Every nail he drove, every pipe he buried, it was like he was saying, let's see if you can stop me. And I'll be honest, there were nights I sat on my porch, staring out at those new structures cutting into the land I'd known my whole life, and I felt something close to anger, real anger, the kind that makes you want to walk over there and tear it all down yourself. But Diane kept me grounded. You touch anything, she said. You give him ammunition. Let the court do its job. So I waited. Weeks turned into months. The case moved through the system, slow as everything does out here. Paperwork, filings, responses, all of it stacking up until it felt like the land itself was holding its breath. Rusty came by a few times, checked markers, made sure nothing had shifted. Each time, he'd shake his head a little more. He's pushing it, he said once. Further than most would. Why? I asked. Rusty looked out across the field, eyes narrowing. Because he thinks you won't push back hard enough. That sat with me. Because maybe, up until then, I hadn't. I'd trusted the system, trusted the process, trusted that truth on paper would be enough. But watching Ethan build on my land like it was already his, it changed something. Not just how I saw him, but how I saw myself in all this. This wasn't just about proving I was right anymore. It was about drawing a line and meaning it. The hearing finally got scheduled 4 months after it all started. For months of watching, waiting, holding back, while someone else slowly rewrote the edges of my world. And when that day came, I remember waking up before sunrise, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at my hands like they belonged to someone else, thinking today, one way or another, this ends. Or at least, it finally becomes something you can't ignore anymore. Courtrooms have a way of shrinking things down. All the noise, all the tension, all those weeks of watching someone build on your land like it's already theirs, it all gets compressed into a few quiet hours under fluorescent lights, where every word suddenly matters more than anything you've said out loud before. I remember walking in with Diane beside me, file tucked under her arm like she'd carried it 1,000 times, and across the room Ethan sat with his attorney, relaxed, almost bored, like this was just another meeting on his calendar. He didn't look at me right away, and when he finally did, there was no anger there, no apology either, just that same steady confidence, like he still believed this was going to go his way. The judge, Margaret Harlow, came in without much ceremony, rancher's daughter from what I'd heard, someone who knew land wasn't just lines on paper. She listened more than she talked, which I appreciated. Let both sides lay everything out, surveys, records, testimony. All of it stacked up piece by piece until the room felt heavy with it. Ethan's attorney spoke first, polished voice, clean arguments, talking about discrepancies, modern measurements, how old deeds can be unreliable, how land evolves over time. It sounded convincing if you didn't know better. Then Diane stood up, and she didn't try to match their polish. She just told the truth, plain and steady, walked the judge through the deed, the markers, Rusty's findings, the consistency across records that went back decades. She didn't rush it, didn't dramatize it, just laid it out in a way that made it hard to look anywhere else. Rusty testified too, simple as ever, explaining where the original monuments were, how they'd been referenced over time, how the measurements aligned. No flair, no ego, just facts that didn't bend. I was called up briefly, asked about the history of the land, how long my family had worked it, whether the fence had ever been formally recognized as the boundary. I answered honestly, said what I knew, admitted what I didn't. There's a strange kind of calm that settles in when you realize you don't have to convince anyone of something that's already true. You just have to not get in its way. When it was over, the judge took a short recess, and those 15 minutes felt longer than the 4 months leading up to them. Nobody talked much. Diane flipped through her notes. Rusty leaned back with his hat in his hands, and I just sat there, staring at the floor, replaying everything that had led to this point. Every stake, every post, every quiet morning that didn't feel so quiet anymore. When Judge Harlow came back, she didn't drag it out. She looked down at the documents one more time, then up at both tables, and said, "The court finds that the plaintiff's survey is accurate and consistent with the recorded deed and historical markers. The defendant's survey contains measurable errors and does not align with established boundaries." Just like that, months of tension snapped into a single moment. She continued, voice steady. "The disputed land is legally recognized as belonging to the plaintiff. The defendant is ordered to remove all structures, improvements, and encroachments within 21 days. 21 days. That was it. No gray area, no negotiation. A clear line, finally drawn where it should have been all along. I didn't feel the kind of victory you see in movies, no fist clenching, no big reaction. It was quieter than that. More like something settling back in a place inside me, something that had been off balance finally righting itself. I glanced over at Ethan. For the first time since this all started, his expression cracked just a little, not dramatically, just enough to show he hadn't expected it to land this way. But even then, he didn't argue, didn't react, just nodded once, like he was already thinking about his next move. We walked out of that courthouse with an answer, but not an ending. Because 21 days came and went, and nothing changed. The stakes were still there. The posts, the irrigation lines, the shed frame, all of it standing like the ruling hadn't even happened. I drove out there on the 22nd morning, sun just starting to break over the horizon. And for a second, I wondered if maybe I'd misunderstood something. Maybe there was an extension, maybe paperwork hadn't gone through. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't confusion. This was defiance. I called Diane. She didn't sound surprised. "All right," she said. Then we moved forward. And when Diane says that, it means things are about to get real in a way paperwork never does. By mid-morning, I was back out on that land, but I wasn't alone this time. Diane was there, Rusty was there, and behind us a small crew we'd hired, guys who knew how to take something down as clean as it went up. The county sheriff had been notified too, just in case things got complicated. Rusty started first, placing official markers along the true boundary, metal stakes driven deep, bright caps on top, unmistakable, permanent. No room for interpretation anymore. Then the crew got to work. Posts came out of the ground one by one. Irrigation lines rolled up, the shed frame dismantled piece by piece. There was no anger in it, no rush, just steady, deliberate work, like correcting something that should have never been there in the first place. About halfway through, I heard a truck coming in fast, gravel kicking up, engine louder than it needed to be. Ethan and Claire pulled up, both of them out of the truck before it fully stopped. Ethan's face had gone red, not just angry, stunned. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted, striding toward us. I didn't move, just reached into the folder Diane had handed me earlier and pulled out the court order, held it out where he could see it. "You had 21 days. He barely glanced at it. "That's my property you're tearing apart." Diane stepped forward then, calm as ever. "No," she said, "it isn't." He looked between us, jaw tight, like he was searching for something to grab onto, some angle that would flip this back in his favor. "You can't just show up and start destroying things," he snapped. The sheriff, who'd been standing off to the side, finally spoke. "Court order says otherwise." That seemed to land harder than anything we'd said. Ethan took a step back, ran a hand through his hair, frustration spilling over now. Claire stood behind him, quieter, but I could see it in her face. This wasn't how they thought this would go either. The crew kept working. Piece by piece, everything he'd built on that strip of land disappeared, until all that was left was bare ground, and those new markers standing clean and certain under the sun. Later that afternoon, Diane got word. Ethan had filed an emergency motion, trying to stop the removal, claim damages, anything that might slow things down. The judge denied it the same day. Not only that, she ordered him to cover my legal fees, the cost of the survey, and the labor it took to remove everything he'd put up. It wasn't about punishment, it was about consequence. And that, more than anything, seemed to finally end it. The next few weeks were quiet again. Not the same kind of quiet as before. This one had weight to it, like both sides were recalibrating, figuring out what came next. I saw Ethan once after that, across the fence, the real fence now, or at least closer to it than it had ever been. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just nodded, brief and distant, like we'd both agreed something without saying it out loud. And I nodded back, not because everything was all right, but because it was settled, or at least settled enough. But here's the thing I keep coming back to, and maybe this is where it gets complicated. Ethan wasn't entirely wrong about one thing. Land isn't just lines on paper. It's how you use it, how you care for it, how you show up for it day after day. And in his own way, he believed he was doing that. He just crossed a line that wasn't his to cross. So now I'm curious what you think. If he had backed off earlier, if he'd come over and talked instead of staking his claim, would it have ended differently? Or was this always going to turn into a fight the moment he decided that paper didn't matter as much as presence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because out here, lines on the ground are one thing, but the lines between people, those are a whole lot harder to redraw.